The beige leather box sat on the dining table like a trophy, tied with a glossy black ribbon. My son Adrian announced it was a special gift for me, right in front of 20 guests at his Thanksgiving feast. But when I lifted the lid and saw the nursing home papers inside, I did not cry. I simply slid the box toward his wife. That single shove was the moment their $60 million life began to collapse. My name is Eleanor Brooks, and at 62 years old, I have become a ghost in my own life. I stood in the kitchen of the Baycrest Hills mansion, wiping a smudge of gravy from a porcelain serving platter, while the hum of 20 guests vibrated through the dining room walls. To the world, I was the mother of Adrian Brooks, the brilliant, self-made tech billionaire. But inside these walls, amidst the crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking California, I was treated like a slightly embarrassing piece of antique furniture that no one knew where to place. The Thanksgiving dinner was a spectacle of excess. Adrian sat at the head of the table, his face flushed with wine and arrogance. He was holding court, gesturing wildly with a fork as he spoke about his fintech company, Nova Ripple Labs. "It is all about disruption," Adrian declared, his voice booming. "We hit a valuation of 200 million last week. 200 million. That is what happens when you have vision. I built this from nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just raw talent and sleepless nights." He did not mention the initial capital. He did not mention the bridge loans. He pointed toward the driveway where his new Tesla Model X sat, and then spoke about the private jet he had chartered for a weekend in Aspen. I placed the turkey on the table, my hands steady despite the ache in my joints, and retreated to the corner. Naomi, his wife, sat to his right. She was dressed in something that cost more than my first car, shimmering under the lights. She swirled her wine and looked pointedly at me as I poured water for a guest. "It is exhausting, really," Naomi said. Her voice pitched high so her influencer friends could hear. "Maintaining a lifestyle like this. People think it is easy, but the overhead is massive, especially the cost of feeding and housing, non-contributing adults. It is like having a permanent guest who never checks out." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter went through the room. No one looked at me. I kept my face blank, a mask of Midwestern stoicism I had perfected over 40 years. Then, the doors swung open. A hired server walked in carrying a box. It was exquisite, made of cream-colored leather and tied with a thick, glossy black ribbon. It looked like it belonged in a museum. "For you, Mom," Adrian announced, silencing the room. "A special gift. Because I know how hard you have worked. In your own way." The air in the room shifted. It felt performative. Adrian gestured for me to open it right there, between the cranberry sauce and the centerpiece. I untied the ribbon. The silk slid away with a soft whisper. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, there was no jewelry. There was no silk scarf. There was a smaller box containing a thick envelope and a document on heavy bond paper. The logo of Nova Ripple Labs was stamped at the top. I read the title. "Residential Care Agreement, Sunrise Serenity Senior Living." I scanned the terms. It was a contract moving me to a nursing home. A high-end one, perhaps, but a nursing home nonetheless. Attached was a debit card with a strict monthly spending limit and a clause stating I had to vacate the Baycrest Hills property within 30 days to preserve the marital privacy of the primary residence. It was not written with love. It was written with cold, corporate efficiency. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. A strange, icy calm settled over me. I looked at Adrian, who was grinning, waiting for me to be overwhelmed by his generosity. I looked at Naomi, who was smirking behind her wine glass. Slowly, deliberately, I folded the paper. I placed it back in the box. I closed the lid with a soft click. Then, I slid the entire heavy leather box across the polished mahogany table until it rested directly in front of Naomi. "This beautiful, flashy thing suits you much better than me, dear," I said, my voice steady and even. "You open it?" Naomi blinked, her eyes lighting up. She assumed I had misunderstood, that perhaps there was a diamond necklace hidden beneath the papers that I was too old to appreciate. She tore into the box, bypassing the contract to pull out the envelope. "Oh, Eleanor, you are too—" She stopped. She had pulled out the brochure for the nursing home and the eviction notice. She began to read the bold print aloud, her voice confident at first, then faltering. "Comprehensive assisted living plan. Relocation mandate. 30-day notice to vacate premises." The silence that descended on the table was absolute. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The guests looked from the papers to Adrian, realizing this was not a gift. It was a deportation order dressed in leather and silk. Adrian's smile faltered. He looked around the room, sweat beading on his forehead. It is a practical solution," he stammered, his laugh sounding brittle and weak. "Mom needs care. We need space. It makes sense on paper." I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply untied my apron and placed it on the back of my chair. "You want practical." "Adrian," I thought to myself as I turned my back on them and walked toward the door, "I will show you what practical really means." As I walked down the long marble hallway away from the dining room, the silence of the empty corridor felt heavy compared to the noise I had left behind. My mind did not stay in the opulent hallway. However, it drifted back 40 years, to the smell of diesel fuel and stale coffee in a roadside diner in Kansas. People see the pearls and the silent demeanor, and they assume I have always been a delicate old woman. They do not know that at 19. I was already driving supply trucks across state lines. I met Hank when I was 23. He was a long-haul driver with grease under his fingernails and a smile that could light up a dark highway. We did not have a venture capital fund. We had a second mortgage on a tiny, drafty house and a singular, terrifying dream. We bought our first 18-wheeler with that mortgage money and founded Blue Horizon Freight. For the first 5 years, our corporate headquarters was a trailer next to a gravel parking lot. I was not just a wife. I was the accountant, the dispatcher, the route coordinator, and the janitor. I raised Adrian in that office. I remember rocking his cradle with one foot while I argued with suppliers on the phone, my hands stained with ink and engine oil. For 20 years. Hank and I built that company with our bare hands. There were nights I slept with my head on a stack of invoices because we could not afford to miss a single delivery window. We survived fuel price spikes that bankrupted our competitors. We ate canned soup so we could invest in better routing technology. When Adrian went off to college in California to study computer science, we were finally wealthy, but we were tired. Adrian hated the business. He came home for Christmas during his sophomore year and looked around our office with disdain. "It is so manual," he had said, wrinkling his nose. "You guys need to modernize. This is the past. I am building the future." He did not understand that the dirty, manual work paid for his tuition. to appease him. Hank and I sold off the old fleet and formed a diversified investment vehicle called Brooks Harbor Holdings. We listed Adrian as a young advisor to give him something to put on his resume, but he barely looked at the documents. He found the logistics industry beneath him. Then Hank died. A patch of black ice on Interstate 70 and my world ended. But I did not have the luxury of grief. I had a company to run. Alone. I negotiated the sale of Blue Horizon Freight to a national logistics giant. The payout was astronomical. I quietly moved every cent into Brooks Harbor Holdings. I structured it carefully. I retained 75% ownership in a blind trust, and I gave Adrian 25% on paper. When Adrian started Nova Ripple Labs, nobody in Silicon Valley wanted to touch him. He was too arrogant and too inexperienced. So, I stepped in. I instructed the holding company to funnel money into his startup through a subsidiary. I hired Luis Moreno, a sharp young executive, to act as the face of the investment, so Adrian would never know the money came from his mother. I funded his seed round. I funded his Series A. When he nearly missed payroll 2 years ago, I authorized a massive bridge loan. Adrian walked around believing he was a genius whom the gods of finance favored. He bragged about his fundraising skills, never realizing he was pitching to empty rooms while I signed the checks in the background. Even this house, this ridiculous mansion in Baycrest Hills, is not his. It is held by a property trust under Brooks Harbor. The Tesla, the private jet hours, the black credit cards, they are all corporate assets I authorized to help him maintain the image of a successful CEO. I stayed silent because I wanted him to be confident. I wanted him to feel like a man who stood on his own 2 feet. I thought if he felt secure, he would be kind. I thought he would eventually turn around and offer a hand to the mother who raised him. Instead, he became a monster. Lately, he had been pressuring me to liquidate my remaining small savings to put into his risky secondary rounds. He looked at me not with love, but as a resource to be mined. I reached the door of my guest suite, the room they graciously allowed me to occupy before they planned to kick me out. On the desk lay a folder my lawyer had given me just hours before the party. Inside was a complete asset map. It confirmed what I already knew, but had been too soft to act upon. I picked up the folder. The truth was simple. Adrian was standing on a stage I had built, wearing a costume I had paid for, reciting lines I had paid for. "You want to send me away, son," I whispered to the empty room. "You have no idea who actually owns the roof over your head." I realized then that I could pull the floor out from under him with nothing more than a fountain pen. And as I thought about the way Naomi had laughed at the dinner table, I knew it was time to uncap the ink. Back in the silence of the downstairs guest suite, I sat at the small writing desk and turned on a single lamp. Upstairs, the party was breaking up. I could hear the muffled sounds of engines starting and the performative goodbyes of people who did not actually like each other. I opened the leather box again, not to cry over it, but to perform an autopsy on my son's betrayal. I smoothed out the residential care agreement under the light. Now that I was not performing for an audience, I read the fine print. It was worse than I thought. The contract had been drafted not by a family attorney, but by the General Counsel of Nova Ripple Labs. Buried on page 14, Clause 6B, was a provision that declared me incapacitated upon admission to the facility, automatically transferring my voting rights in any family trusts to my next of kin. Then there was the heavy envelope beneath it. It contained a durable power of attorney. If I had signed this perhaps in a moment of emotional weakness, which they had clearly banked on, Adrian would have gained the legal authority to move all my assets into a blind trust under his control. He had framed it as protecting me from the complexities of old age. In reality, it was a hostile takeover. But Adrian and Naomi had made a fatal error. They assumed I was slow. I allowed myself a rare, cold smile. They did not know that the courier had arrived at the service entrance an hour before dinner. I had intercepted the box, taken it to the pantry, and carefully steamed it open. I had photographed every single page. Then, I had removed the original power of attorney and replaced it with a visually identical document my own lawyer had prepared weeks ago as a fail-safe. The document now resting in that box was not a surrender of power. It was a revocation of all previous proxy rights I had ever granted Adrian. When I pushed that box to Naomi, I was not just rejecting a gift. I was tricking them into holding the very weapon that disarmed them. I pulled out my laptop and initiated a secure video call. The screen flickered, and Miriam Adler's face appeared. She was 70 years old, with sharp eyes behind thick glasses. The only person left who remembered Hank and me before the money. "Did he do it?" Miriam asked, her voice raspy from decades of smoking. "He did," I replied, my voice devoid of tremor. "The box, the contract, the eviction notice. It was all there. Miriam, just as we feared." Miriam sighed, taking off her glasses to rub the bridge of her nose. "Then we proceed. You know what this means, Eleanor? If we trigger the clauses in the Brooks Harbor Charter, it is not just a warning shot, it is the nuclear option. I want to execute Plan B," I said. "Tonight." Plan B was a strategy we had drafted 3 years ago, nicknamed the Cord Cutter. It involved the immediate divestment of Brooks Harbor Holdings from Nova Ripple Labs. It triggered the demand for full repayment of the bridge loans that were secured by Adrian's personal assets because he had been too arrogant to read the terms. "I want the bridge loan called in," I instructed. Looking at the digital clock, it was nearly midnight. "I want the collateral seizure process initiated for the house, the cars, and the lease on the jet. And I want the transfer of the liquid assets, the funds he thinks are his safety net, moved into the new entity we discussed, the Harbor Homes Foundation." Miriam hesitated. "Eleanor, this will destroy his cash flow within 48 hours. His company valuation will tank if the lead investor pulls out so aggressively. He could lose the CEO seat. He will be humiliated." I looked at the nursing home brochure still sitting on my desk. The glossy photo showed elderly people staring blankly at a television. "He tried to erase me, Miriam," I said softly. "He chose to see me as a liability on a balance sheet. I am simply correcting the accounting. Initiate the transfer. Consider it done," Miriam said. "I will file the papers with the court first thing in the morning for the next hour." I signed digital documents, withdrawal notices, asset transfer orders, collateral seizure warrants. I signed my name over and over, and with each stroke of the stylus, I felt a heavy tether snapping. I was cutting him loose. At 5 in the morning, the house was silent. The air smelled of stale wine and expensive perfume. I packed a single duffel bag. I did not take the jewelry Adrian had bought me with my own money. I did not take the designer clothes Naomi had picked out to make me look presentable. I walked to the kitchen island. I placed the spare key to the mansion on the marble countertop. Next to it, I left a handwritten note on plain paper. "Thank you for the dinner. Your gift helped me make a decision I have been delaying for too long. Good luck with the real world." I walked out the back door, bypassing the garage where the luxury cars slept. Parked down the driveway, near the service gate, was a 10-year-old Ford Explorer registered to a shell company nobody paid attention to. I threw my bag in the passenger seat and started the engine. It roared to life with a rough, reliable sound that reminded me of the old trucks. I did not look back at the mansion looming against the pre-dawn sky. I shifted the car into drive and turned the wheel toward the coast, heading for Seabridge. It was a small, working-class town where the salt air stripped paint off the houses and people worked for a living. It was the only place left where I could breathe. I did not need to be in the room to know exactly how Adrian's morning began. I had orchestrated every second of it. At 6:30 in the morning, while I was grinding coffee beans in my small kitchen in Seabridge, Adrian woke up to a digital avalanche. His phone, usually filled with praise from sycophants, was flashing red with high-priority notifications from the chief financial officer of Nova Ripple and Luis Moreno. The subject lines were brutal in their simplicity. Notice of capital withdrawal and immediate repayment demand. Luis later told me that Adrian called him at 7 o'clock. Screaming. "What is this?" Luis Adrian had shouted, his voice cracking with sleep and panic. "Brooks Harbor is pulling the Series A funding. They cannot do that. We have a burn rate of $200,000 a month. Raid the contract." Adrian. Luis had replied calmly. Clause 14. The investor reserves the right to recall all bridge loans and liquidate equity if the primary guarantor, that is you, attempts to alter the governance structure of the holding family trust. You tried to force your mother out. You triggered the default. While Adrian was hyperventilating in his silk pajamas, his wife was facing her own reality check across town. Naomi had gone to an exclusive spa for a morning facial, eager to post about her stress relief. When she went to pay, she handed over the heavy black card she had used for 3 years. "I am sorry, Mrs. Brooks," the receptionist said, her voice polite but loud enough for the other patrons to hear. "The card has been declined. The issuer reports it has been reported lost or stolen by the primary account holder. That is ridiculous," Naomi stammered, tapping her manicured nails on the counter. "It is a black card. Try it again." "I have tried it 3 times. Ma'am, it is dead." The card was not Naomi's. It was a supplementary card issued on my personal account, the account Adrian had always assumed was just a bottomless pit of family money. I had deactivated it at midnight with a single click. Back at Baycrest Hills, the humiliation moved from digital to physical. At 9 in the morning, a procession of heavy-duty tow trucks rumbled up the private driveway. They did not care about the manicured hedges. A man with a clipboard rang the doorbell while his team began hooking up the Tesla Model X and Naomi's Range Rover. Adrian ran out in his bathrobe, waving his arms. "Hey, get away from there. Those are company cars." "Exactly," the repo man said, not even looking up from his manifest. "And the company that owns the lease, Brooks Harbor Holdings, has revoked authorization for use. We are also seizing the keys to the property for inspection. You have breached the occupancy agreement." My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was Adrian. I looked at the screen, saw his smiling face from a photo taken 5 years ago, and let it ring. It buzzed again, and again. I poured my coffee, the steam rising in the cool sea air, and watched the screen go dark. I was not ready to speak. He needed to listen to the silence first. By noon, the damage had spilled onto the internet. Naomi, in her infinite vanity, had posted a photo of that cursed leather box on her Instagram story 2 days ago, captioning it, "Big Things Coming Family Legacy." Now that rumours of the nursing home contract were leaking courtesy of a chatty caterer, I might have tipped extra. The narrative flipped instantly. The comments section turned into a war zone. People connected the dots. The gift was an eviction notice for his mother. The headline on a tech gossip blog read, "Billionaire tech bro tries to evict mom, gets evicted instead." Adrian tried to convene an emergency board meeting at Nova Ripple to stop the bleeding, but Miriam Adler had already sent her strike. She emailed Adrian a digital copy of the documents I had signed the night before, along with a note that was sharper than any knife. "Dear Adrian," she wrote, "you prepared papers to strip your mother of her rights because you thought she was frail. She is merely exercising the rights you signed over to her when you were too busy feeling important to read your own contracts. This is not a negotiation. This is an execution of terms." When Adrian returned to the mansion, or rather, the house he was now technically squatting in, Naomi was waiting. She was not supportive. She was terrified. "They took the car." "Adrian," she hissed, pacing the living room. "And my stylist just cancelled my appointment because my credit card bounced. You told me we owned this house. You told me the company was yours. It is mine." Adrian yelled, throwing his phone onto the couch. "My mother is just... She is having a breakdown. She is vindictive. She is the owner." Naomi screamed back, tears of rage streaking her makeup. "We are broke, Adrian. We are practically homeless because you tried to put her in a home. How could you be so stupid?" I sat in my small living room in Seabridge, watching the reports roll in on my laptop. The valuation of Nova Ripple was in freefall as investors got spooked by the sudden withdrawal of the anchor capital. Adrian would have to fire 30% of his staff by Friday just to keep the lights on. It felt cruel. My chest tightened with a phantom pain, the instinct of a mother wanting to run and shield her child from the fire. But I forced myself to keep my hands wrapped around the warm mug, staying rooted to my chair. If I intervened now, if I rushed in to fix it like I always did, the lesson would vanish. He would only learn that he could attempt to bury his mother and suffer no consequences. I watched the digital reports from Miriam and Luis continue to populate my inbox, documenting the systematic dismantling of his ego. It felt ruthless. It felt like watching a building implode in slow motion. But for the first time in years, I also felt a strange sense of relief. I looked at the phone screen one last time before turning it face down on the table. You need to feel the exact weight of the contracts you once treated like a game. "Son," I whispered to the empty room. "This is what they really weigh." It was 7 days after the dinner party, and the Baycrest Hills mansion had transformed from a palace into a prison. I was not there to witness the implosion firsthand, but Luis sent me the security logs and audio recordings from the boardroom. I pieced together the rest. Adrian and Naomi sat in the living room, which was now noticeably emptier after the repossession team had cleared out the company-owned art. The air was thick with accusation. "Just go on television and apologize to her." Naomi screamed, pacing across the hardwood floor in heels she had not yet realized she could no longer afford. "Tell the world you love your mother. Cry a little. She will melt." Old women always melt. It is not that simple. Adrian snapped, his head in his hands. "It is a trap. Naomi, if I apologize now, I admit I was wrong. I admit the company is hers. I lose my leverage." "You have no leverage," Naomi yelled, throwing a pillow at him. "You have a burn rate and a negative cash flow. I did not marry you to clip coupons. You married me for better or worse, Adrian muttered. I married a tech mogul, not a squatter, she retorted. That was the moment Miriam Adler chose to detonate the second mine I had planted years ago. A courier arrived with a sealed document addressed to both of them. It was a copy of the prenuptial agreement Adrian had signed 5 years prior, a document I had insisted upon, threatening to cut off his seed funding if he did not execute it. Naomi tore it open. She scanned the highlighted section. Clause 7A. Dissolution of assets. What is this? Naomi whispered, her face draining of colour. It says, Adrian said, reading over her shoulder, his voice hollow, that in the event of a marital dissolution triggered by financial mismanagement or the misuse of family holding assets, the spouse that is you is entitled to 0% of the equity. 0. And since the handbags, the jewellery, and the cars were purchased through Brooks Harbour accounts, I imagined Miriam's voice echoing in the room. They are classified as misappropriated company property. You do not own them. Naomi, you just leased the lifestyle. Naomi went quiet. A dangerous, calculating silence. 2 hours later, Luis Moreno intercepted a call made from the guest bathroom. Naomi had contacted a venture capitalist known for hostile takeovers, a man who had been trying to buy Nova Ripple for pennies on the dollar. I can give you his client list, Naomi whispered into her phone, her voice shaking. I can give you the source code access keys. I know where he keeps the hard drives. But I want $2 million in an offshore account and a ticket to Zurich. She did not know that Luis monitored all outgoing data from the house network. The next morning, at the emergency board meeting, Adrian tried to rally his remaining executives. He looked tired. His suit was wrinkled. Before he could speak, Luis placed a small speaker on the conference table. Before we discuss strategy, Luis said, we need to discuss a security breach. He played the recording. Naomi's voice filled the room, offering to sell Adrian's life's work for a plane ticket. Adrian sat frozen. His face turned a shade of grey I had never seen before. It was the look of a man realizing that the woman sleeping next to him was holding a knife. She did not mean it. Adrian stammered, but he knew it was a lie. She meant every word. Adrian. Luis said, we have grounds to sue her for corporate espionage, or you can handle this quietly. That evening, the marriage that had started with a 6-figure wedding ended in a shouting match in the foyer. Adrian demanded a quiet divorce. Naomi refused, threatening to go to the tabloids with stories of a cruel mother-in-law. Miriam was ready. She sent a cease and desist letter within minutes, outlining a countersuit for defamation and theft of trade secrets that would leave Naomi in debt for the next 40 years. Naomi folded. She packed 2 suitcases, only the clothes she had actually paid for with her own meagre earnings, and called a taxi to the airport. She was flying back to her parents in Florida. She left a note on the kitchen counter. You lost your biggest gift. Adrian, your image. Call me when you get it back. If I still need you, then. Adrian stood alone in the echo of the slamming door. He had lost his wife, his reputation, and his fortune in the span of 10 days. And it all started because he thought a leather box could solve the problem of an aging mother. Desperate. He drove a cheap rental sedan down the coast to Seabridge. He arrived at my small, 1-story house at 10 o'clock at night. He pounded on the door. Mum, he shouted. Mum, please, I need to talk to you. I am sorry. But the house was dark. The curtains were drawn. A neighbor walking a dog stopped and looked at him with suspicion. "She is not there," the neighbor said. "She went out of town. Said she had big meetings with some architects. I was 200 miles away, reviewing blueprints for affordable housing. I checked my security camera feed on my phone and saw my son sitting on my porch steps, burying his face in his knees. He waited there for 3 hours. I did not turn on the lights remotely. I did not call him. He needed to sit in the dark. He needed to understand that I was not a safety net anymore. I was the ground, and he had finally hit it. The liquidation of the Baycrest Hills estate happened with the brutal speed of a foreclosure auction. Adrian sold the mansion for 20% under market value just to satisfy the immediate repayment demands from Brooks Harbor and the bank. When the dust settled and the lawyers took their fees, my son, who had once boasted of a net worth in the 9 figures, was left with enough cash to rent a moving truck and pay off his personal credit card debt. There was no surplus for a new life of luxury. He moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in a grey, stucco complex near the industrial district of the East Bay. It was the kind of place where the air always smelled of exhaust, and the sound of the freeway was a constant, low-frequency hum. For the first time in his 32 years, Adrian had to hang his own shower curtain. I was told by Luis that Adrian spent 40 minutes trying to figure out how to operate the coin-operated washing machine in the basement, standing there with a basket of designer shirts that looked ridiculous against the peeling linoleum floor. At the Nova Ripple offices, the humiliation was formalized. The board of directors, now fully aware of the nursing home scandal, voted unanimously to remove Adrian as CEO. They kept him on as a technical advisor, a title that meant he had a desk, a laptop, and 0 decision-making power. His salary was slashed by 70%. The corner office with the view of the bay was given to a seasoned executive appointed by the investors. Adrian sat in a cubicle near the server room, listening to the new leadership dismantle his vanity projects. He tried to find a way out. He sent his resume to top-tier venture capital firms and tech giants, banking on his reputation as a visionary. But the Silicon Valley rumor mill is viciously efficient. "We cannot hire you, Adrian," one recruiter told him over a Zoom call that Adrian took in his car because his apartment walls were too thin. "The optics are radioactive. You are the guy who tried to evict his mother. We build community apps. You are the opposite of community. Isolated and cash poor." Adrian began to notice the people he had spent his life ignoring. One evening, while struggling to carry a bag of groceries up the 3 flights of stairs, he met his neighbor, Sarah Jenkins. She was 55, a night shift worker at a supermarket, with tired eyes and swollen ankles. "Here, let me get the door for you." "Honey?" Sarah said, holding the heavy fire door open with her hip. They started talking in the hallway. Sarah told him about her own son, a successful lawyer in Chicago who had stopped calling 2 years ago when she got sick and needed help with medical bills. "He is busy, I guess," Sarah said, forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Success takes a lot of time. Sometimes I think he just forgot that I am a person. You know, I became just another bill to pay." Adrian stood there, holding a carton of milk, and I imagine he felt like he was looking into a mirror that showed his soul instead of his face. He realized he was the villain in Sarah's story. To make rent, Adrian had to swallow his pride completely. He took freelance coding gigs under a pseudonym, fixing bugs for startups run by 20-year-olds. And in the evenings, the self-made billionaire got behind the wheel of a rented sedan to drive for a food delivery service. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. His father and I had built our fortune driving trucks, a profession Adrian had mocked as unskilled labor. Now, he was navigating traffic for tips, feeling the ache in his lower back that his father had complained about for decades. Late at night, sitting in his sparsely furnished living room with a stack of overdue bills, Adrian would think about the contracts he had tried to force on me. He realized that every signature I had given him over the years on trust funds, on seed capital, on property deeds, was not a legal obligation. It was an act of faith, and he had used that faith to build a weapon. My phone would buzz with his messages. I read every single one of them. I am sorry. Mum. I am trying to fix it. I am trying to understand. I met a woman named Sarah today. She reminds me of you. I helped her carry her laundry. I am still waiting. I will wait as long as it takes. I did not reply. It took every ounce of my willpower to keep my thumbs from typing, I forgive you. But forgiveness without change is just permission to sin again. I let the silence stretch, using the pain of his isolation to temper him like steel. While Adrian was learning to be a human being in the East Bay, I was in Seabridge, standing in the lobby of the community center. I watched young families huddled in corners, filling out housing applications that I knew would be rejected because the rents in California were criminal. I looked at the tired mothers and the fathers with calloused hands, men like Hank, women like the younger version of me. We have the land, I thought, my mind racing back to the liquidated assets of Brooks Harbor. We have the capital from the sale of the mansion. We have the logistics network. I pulled out my notebook and sketched a rough square. It was not a nursing home. It was a small, dignified apartment complex. Adrian built a company to move money. I whispered to myself, I am going to use his inheritance to move people home. The plan for the Harbor Homes Foundation was born right there, amidst the smell of floor wax and desperation. And I knew exactly who I would hire to build it once he was finished breaking apart. The launch of the Harbor Homes Foundation was not the quiet, backroom affair I was used to. For 40 years, I had operated in the shadows, a silent partner behind steering wheels and shipping containers. But this time, I stepped onto the podium in front of the Seabridge Town Hall. The flashbulbs were blinding. The headlines the next day did not call me the mother of a tech billionaire. They called me Eleanor Brooks, the logistics magnate turning industrial profits into affordable housing. I knew Adrian would see it. And he did. He was sitting in a laundromat in East Bay, waiting for his dryer cycle to finish, scrolling through news on a cracked phone screen. He stopped at a photograph of me standing in a vacant lot, pointing at a blueprint. I looked strong. I looked like the woman who had negotiated freight contracts in truck stops, not the old lady he had tried to store away in a facility. For the first time, he was seeing me not as an extension of his life, but as the protagonist of my own. Adrian began showing up at community housing meetings in the basement of a local church. He sat in the back row, wearing a hoodie, listening to families describe the terror of rent hikes. My landlord raised the rent by $300 last month, a young mechanic said, his voice shaking. He said the market algorithm told him to do it. I have 2 kids. Where are we supposed to go? Adrian shrank in his seat. In his previous life at Nova Ripple, he had built those algorithms. He had sold the software that maximized yield for landlords, treating human displacement as a data point for efficiency. Now, he was looking at the faces of his data points. A small, non-profit organization struggling with a crashing database noticed him lurking. They asked if he knew anything about computers. Adrian did not hand them a business card or ask for equity. He simply sat down at their chaotic desk and spent 4 straight nights recoding their case management system. He streamlined their workflow for free. When the director thanked him with a cup of cheap coffee and genuine gratitude, Adrian felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was the feeling of being useful, not valuable. Then came the rain. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Adrian found his neighbor, Sarah Jenkins, weeping at her kitchen table. She was trying to fill out a housing application for a new lottery system. "I do not understand this form." "Adrian." Sarah sobbed. "The letters are too small, and they ask for things I do not have." "Let me look at it." "Sarah," Adrian said gently. He pulled the paper toward him. At the top of the page was the logo for the Harbour Homes Foundation, a stylized anchor combined with a roof. Adrian froze. His breath hitched. "I drew this," he whispered. "What did you say?" Honey Sarah asked. "I drew this logo," he said, tracing the lines with his finger. "I sketched it on a napkin when I was a freshman in college for a side project I never finished. Mum kept it. She saved it. That night, Adrian wrote me an email. It was not a plea for money. It was 3,000 words long. He told me about the leaking roof in his apartment. He told me about the mechanic at the church meeting. He told me how he realized that housing was not an asset class to be leveraged, but a human right to be protected. I read his email in my temporary office in Seabridge. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the text. He was not writing like a CEO. He was writing like my son. He is changing. Miriam. I said to my lawyer, who was organizing files on the shelf. Miriam stopped and looked at me over her glasses. Of course he is changing. You broke his legs, and now he is learning to walk. But you have to decide. Eleanor, if you keep ignoring him, your revenge will be complete. You will be right. But are you sure you want to be right and childless? Her question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I looked at the rain streaking down the window. I had wanted to teach him a lesson, not destroy him. If I pushed any harder, there would be nothing left to salvage. I opened my phone. I typed a message, deleted it, and typed it again. I needed him to know that the door was unlocked, but he still had to turn the handle himself. I received your email. If you are truly serious about social housing, and not just looking for a way back to comfort, I will give you one opportunity to prove it. Be ready. E. In his cramped apartment. Adrian read the text. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He knew his mother. He knew that when Eleanor Brooks offered an opportunity, it was never a gift. It was a test. And this time, he knew he could not afford to fail. He set the phone down, took a deep breath, and whispered into the empty room. I am ready. Mum. The headquarters of the Harbour Homes Foundation was a renovated red brick warehouse near the Seabridge docks, smelling faintly of salt water and fresh sawdust. It was a far cry from the hermetically sealed glass tower of Nova Ripple Labs. When Adrian walked through the front door, he looked out of place in his tailored suit, which was now slightly loose around his collar. This was the first time we had stood in the same room since the night of the gift box. I did not hug him. I did not offer him coffee. I stood behind my desk, flanked by Luis Moreno and a team of young engineers, and I extended my hand like I was greeting a subcontractor. Welcome to the team, I said, my voice stripped of maternal warmth. Adrian hesitated, looking at my hand, then at my eyes. He shook it. His grip was firm, but his palms were damp. "Thank you for the meeting." "Mum," he said, his voice cracking on the last word. "In this building, I am the chairwoman." I corrected him. "And you are the project advisor for the pilot program." Nothing more. I turned to the projection screen. I laid out the impossible task. We possessed a plot of land near the old freight terminals that had belonged to Brooks Harbour for decades. The assignment was to build 40 residential units for the local dock workers. The budget was razor thin. The timeline was 12 months, and the rental price had to be 40% below the market rate. "You cannot use the Nova Ripple brand," I told him, staring him down. "You cannot use high-interest leverage. You have to build this using only the capital we have allocated and the brains of the people in this room." Adrian nodded, shifting into his old persona. He turned to the team and started talking. "Right. So, what we need is a scalable platform," Adrian said, moving his hands in wide, sweeping gestures. "If we utilize modular prefabrication and create a synergy between the supply chain and the user experience—" "Stop." A voice cut through the air. Maya, our lead architect, a 28-year-old woman with plaster dust on her boots, slammed her pencil down on the table. "Mr. Brooks," Maya said, not looking up from her blueprints. "Here, you need to speak in square footage and load-bearing walls, not buzzwords. Synergy does not keep the rain out. How do we fit 40 families on this lot without violating the fire code?" "Answer that." Adrian blinked. He looked at me for help. I stayed silent, sitting at the back of the room, doodling on my notepad. He was on his own. Over the next few weeks, the transformation was painful to watch. Adrian stopped wearing the suit. He started wearing jeans and work boots. He followed Maya into the mud of the construction site, standing in the cold rain while carpenters explained why his digital designs were physically impossible. I saw him arguing with a plumber, not about stock options, but about the price of copper piping. He was learning that the physical world had rules that money could not bend. During our weekly status meetings, I let Luis grill him. "You are over budget on the foundation." "Adrian," Luis would say, tapping the spreadsheet. "Fix it, or we scrap the project." I can renegotiate with the concrete supplier," Adrian stammered, looking exhausted. "I just need more time." "You have 24 hours, I said from the back corner. It was the only thing I said during the entire hour. The real test came 2 months later at the city council meeting. We needed a zoning variance to proceed, but the wealthy residents of the neighboring hillside people who lived in houses like the one Adrian used to own were protesting. They claimed our project would bring undesirable elements to the neighborhood. I ordered Adrian to present our case. I wanted him to face the very class of people he had desperately tried to join. The town hall was packed. Adrian stood at the microphone, looking small against the angry crowd. He began to explain the economic benefits of workforce housing, his voice steadying as he spoke. Then, a local businessman in a bespoke suit stood up. I recognized him. He was a man who had once tried to invest in Nova Ripple. "Why should we trust a word you say?" "Son," the man sneered, pointing a finger at Adrian. "You are the guy from the news. The billionaire who tried to evict his own mother to a nursing home just to clear up space for his parties. You do not care about people. You care about your image. This charity project is just a PR stunt, isn't it?" The room went deadly silent. The council members looked uncomfortable. I sat in the front row, my hands clasped, waiting. This was the moment. He could lie. He could deflect. He could blame the media. Adrian gripped the podium. He looked down at his notes. Then he looked directly at the man. "You are right," Adrian said quietly. "I did that." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I treated my mother like an overhead cost," Adrian continued, his voice shaking slightly but gaining strength. "I thought human beings were just numbers to be managed. And because of that arrogance, I lost everything. I lost my wife. I lost my company. I lost my home." He looked out at the faces of the dock workers sitting in the back, men and women who looked like his father. "I am not building these houses to save my reputation," Adrian said. "I am building them because I finally know what it feels like to be afraid of losing the roof over your head. I do not want anyone else to feel that. Not in this town." He sat down. The silence lasted for 10 seconds. Then, the council president called for a vote. It passed. 4 votes to 3. As we walked out of the town hall into the cool night air, Adrian looked drained. He loosened his tie and leaned against a lamppost, watching the cars drive by. He looked terrified that I would scold him for admitting his shame in public. I walked past him to my car. I stopped, turned, and caught his eye. I did not smile, but I gave him a single, firm nod. It was the first time I had acknowledged his existence as a man, rather than a disappointment, since the day I signed the eviction papers. Adrian let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for months, and in the yellow light of the street lamp, I saw him straighten his spine. We had a building to raise. The construction site of Seabridge Homes became a living organism. Over the next 4 months, I watched the skeleton of the project rise from the mud. The framing went up in a rhythm of hammers and saws that sounded like music to my ears. Adrian was there every day. He did not just supervise, he integrated himself. He used his background in fintech to code a custom maintenance app for the future tenants, allowing them to track their utility usage and report repairs directly to the foundation. It was brilliant, efficient, and cost us nothing but his sleep. But reality, as it often does in construction, hit us hard in November. Maya came into the site trailer one Tuesday morning, her face pale under the layer of dust. She slammed a geological report on Adrian's desk. "We have a problem," she said. "The drainage calculations are off. If we get a 50-year storm, which is predicted for this winter, the runoff will flood the lower units. We need to install a secondary culvert system." Adrian stared at the map. "What is the cost? $50,000? Maya replied. "And a 2-week delay? We would have to rip up the pavement we just laid." I watched Adrian from my corner. I knew the old Adrian. The old Adrian would have buried the report. He would have paid off an inspector to sign the certificate of occupancy and gambled that the storm would never come. He would have prioritized the deadline over the people. He stood up and looked out the window at the fresh concrete. He closed his eyes for a moment. "Halt the paving," Adrian said, his voice low. "Dig it up. The board is going to eat you alive," Maya warned. "I know," he said. "Do it." The emergency board meeting the next day was brutal. The room was filled with the same people who had watched Adrian fall from grace, and now they looked at him with renewed suspicion. "You are asking for a budget increase of $50,000 when we are already tight," one board member challenged. "This looks like the old pattern. Adrian. Mismanagement. Waste." Adrian stood at the head of the table. He did not deflect. He pulled up a spreadsheet. "If we do not fix this," Adrian said, pointing to the projection. The structural damage from a single flood event will cost the foundation $500,000 in repairs over 10 years. We are not burning cash. We are buying longevity. I am trading 2 weeks of delay for 20 years of safety. The room went quiet. His logic was sound. It was humble. I leaned forward. And if the project fails because of this delay, if we miss the grant deadline, Adrian looked me in the eye. Then I will liquidate my remaining personal assets, my car, my watch, my 401k to cover the penalty. I will take the hit. Not the foundation. Not you. I held his gaze. Approved, I said. But we need to offset the cost. Find the money elsewhere. We cut the ornamental Japanese garden. Adrian said immediately. It is pretty, but it is expensive to maintain. We replace it with a community vegetable patch. The residents maintain it. Cost is zero. Community value is high. The board nodded. He had won them over. 3 weeks later, during the frantic push to install the new pipes. I was visiting the site when I heard a shout. I turned to see Adrian slip on a patch of wet clay near the open trench. He went down hard, his leg twisting at an ugly angle. Adrian. I screamed. The composure I had maintained for a year shattered. I ran across the uneven ground, my heart hammering in my throat. I knelt beside him in the mud. He was clutching his ankle, his face white with pain. You idiot, I yelled, grabbing his shoulders. Why were you not looking? Do you want to kill yourself before we finish? Adrian looked up at me, wheezing through his teeth. I am okay. Mum? It is just a sprain. I stopped. My hands were gripping his dirty jacket so tight my knuckles were white. I realized I was shaking. I realized I was not the chairwoman of the board in that moment. I was just a mother terrified that her boy was hurt. I pulled my hands back as if I had been burned. Later, in the site's first aid trailer, while a medic wrapped his ankle in ice, the room was quiet. The rain drummed on the metal roof. Why did you do it? Adrian asked softly, not looking at me. Do what the box, he said. The public humiliation. Taking everything. You could have just scolded me. You could have cut me off quietly. Why did you have to burn it all down? I looked at his swollen ankle. I looked at the mud on his face. Because I was terrified. Adrian, I admitted, my voice trembling. When I saw that contract you sent me, I did not just see greed. I saw erasure. I felt like I was disappearing. You made me feel like a line item to be deleted. And I knew. I knew that if I did not make you feel exactly how small a person can be when they are stripped of everything, you would never see me again. You would only see a wallet. Adrian was silent. He looked at his hands. I see you now. He whispered. I really see you. I know. I said. The project finished on time, despite the delay. As the inauguration day approached, I went to my office and pulled out a small item I had been keeping in my safe. I wrapped it carefully in plain brown paper. No ribbons, no gloss. The first box I gave him had destroyed his false world. This box was the final brick in the new one. The inauguration of Seabridge Homes was a chaotic mix of salt air, fresh paint, and the flash of camera shutters. Reporters from national networks had descended on our small coastal town, drawn not just by the charity, but by the irresistible narrative of the tech bro redemption. They wanted to see if the man who had tried to evict his mother was truly a changed soul or just playing a new angle. I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. 40 families were standing there. holding the keys to their new apartments units that rented for $600 a month in a state where you could barely find a parking space for that price. My husband and I built a fortune on 18 wheels, I said into the microphone, my voice echoing off the brick facade of the new building. We moved cargo across this country so that one day we could move people into homes. This foundation is not a gift. It is a repayment of a debt we owe to the working people of America. I did not mention Adrian in my opening remarks. I saw him standing to the side, wearing a simple button-down shirt, looking nervous. He dipped his head, accepting the omission as his penance. But this project had a project manager. I continued, turning my body toward him. Adrian, please come up here. The crowd murmured. Adrian froze for a second, then walked up the steps. He looked terrified. He stood next to me, blinking in the sunlight. I reached under the podium and pulled out the small box wrapped in plain brown paper. 1 year ago, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the lot. You sent me a box that almost erased me from your life. Today, I am sending you a box in return. Adrian took it. His hands were shaking. I knew he was remembering the leather box, the glossy ribbon, and the cruelty inside it. He was terrified that this was the final trap, a public firing, perhaps, or a deed transferring his debt to the public record. Open it, I commanded softly. He tore the paper. He lifted the lid. Inside, there was no eviction notice. There was a single silver key, a folded document, and a photograph I had kept in my wallet for 30 years. He unfolded the paper first. It was a restated Articles of Incorporation for the Harbour Homes Foundation. That document, I explained to the silent crowd, transfers 40% of the voting rights of this foundation to you, Adrian. But read the clause. You cannot sell it. You cannot use it as collateral for a loan. You can only use it to vote on new housing projects. Adrian looked at the photo. It was a picture of me at 25, my face smeared with engine grease, holding him as a baby in front of our very first rusted truck. On the back, in my handwriting, it read, "This is the real gift. I never gave you the truth about where we came from. You thought value was in the leather box. Son," I said, speaking to him but letting the microphone catch every word. You thought you were a self-made man because I hid the struggle from you. I protected you so much that you became weak. I am not giving you your money back today. I am giving you responsibility, and that is heavier than any house or car. I looked at the audience, then back at him. When you gave me that nursing home contract, I said, my voice dropping an octave, I wanted to tear it up and scream. I wanted to destroy you. But I realized that if I only took revenge, you would learn that power is just a weapon we use to smash each other. I want you to learn something else. Power is a tool we use to build things. Adrian stared at the photo, his eyes filling with tears. He stepped to the microphone. He did not look like a billionaire anymore. He looked like a man who had been broken apart and put back together. Adrian started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat. I used to think I was the smartest person in the room. I thought my mother was an inconvenience to be managed. I lost everything: my wife, my company, my pride when I dared to treat her like a burden. And that loss, it was the only thing that could have brought me here. He held up the key. I will build, Adrian said, his voice firming up. I will not stop building. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. It was the first time I had hugged him in years. I felt him shudder against my shoulder, the tension of the last 12 months finally releasing. The cameras clicked furiously, capturing the redemption moment. But I did not care about the optics. I leaned in close to his ear, whispering so only he could hear. The first box you sent destroyed your fake world. Adrian, this box does not give you the old world back. It gives you a new one to build from scratch. Do not turn it into a weapon again. Adrian pulled back. He looked at me, clutching the key and the contract. There was fear in his eyes. Yes. But for the first time, there was also a steely resolve. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion. He did not need another gift. He had work to do. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you guys are tuning in from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this journey of revenge and redemption, please make sure to subscribe to the Grandma's Family Diary channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people. See you in the next one.